Hello, everyone. This is Gabby Panetta, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing once again one of my favorite people on the planet, Allyson McQuinn. Hi, Allyson. How are you?
Hello, I'm so well, Gabby. I'm in beautiful Guanajuato, Mexico, and how could I not be super happy? The
Right.
weather's fantastic, and yeah, I'm just
You're
loving
so
my life.
amazing. Good. So, for those of you who don't know or don't remember some of the videos that I've done with Ally is a Heilkunst homeopath. And just to remind everyone the difference between regular homeopathy, Ali, and Heilkunst, could you go over that a little bit?
Yeah, with pleasure. So we went back into Dr. Samuel Hahnemann's original works and found there a blueprint really for the ultimate resolution of people's suffering. And it was a big departure because it was actually a a scholar par excellence in California that said, you guys haven't translated the works of Hahnemann correctly. Do you actually want to know? Because he was contracted by a woman to actually retranslate Hahnemann's sixth edition of his Organon, Der Heilkunst, which is a word just means whole art of healing and curing. And
Right.
so one dude in Ottawa, Canada, Rudy Verspoor, put his hand up and said, I can only get my patients a certain distance with homeopathic principles. Can you help me understand Hahnemann's greater, really his works? So the two of them partnered almost 30 years ago and have been talking every Monday night for that length of time for decades. And they've written books, The Dynamic Legacy, From Homeopathy to Heilkunst. We preserve that word in our community because it's the only one that describes the dynamic of being able really to take people like an onion and peel the emotional and physical shocks and traumas off in the order in which they have been assumed.
Mhm.
And to the goal being resolve the underlying cause of what it is that people are suffering. It's a landmine, Gabby, I gotta tell you. Hahnemann was 230 years ago alive, and he wasn't dealing with, myocarditis as an epidemic or turbo cancers, or, I have some patients that are on over 12 medications, and so it's a landmine, I have
Yeah.
to tell you. So
Yeah.
simpler cases like children, dogs, cats are actually a pleasure. There are other times I'm up at night, just can't sleep with the complications of cases these days.
Right. Amazing.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to share a little bit for those of you who's this is your first time watching. I came across Ally when I was dealing with my own autoimmune condition that I was told by allopathic medicine was incurable, and we proved them wrong. I'm happy to report I haven't had any symptoms since I started working with Ali. There was a lot of emotional trauma that I had to get out of my body. And it's not just Heilkunst medicine that deals with the emotional roots of disease. But if you look at traditional Chinese medicine as well, there's a direct correlation between the emotional body and the energetic body, as well as the physical body. So
Yeah.
it's not a new concept. It's been around for thousands of years, and there's different approaches to it. This is the approach that I really resonated with because it's something actually that's very much a thing for Mexicans. I'm originally from Mexico, and we have a homeopathic hospital in Mexico City, which very few people know about that. Yes, so in general, Mexican culture is very open to homeopathic medicine. It works. We know that. And when clients question, well, how do I know that it's not a placebo effect? And I just say, what do you care? As long as it works. Right? But I can tell you that it, for my case specifically, it wasn't placebo because the emotions that I was releasing, there's no way that I could have known prior to that I was going to release the level of anger that I had repressed for so many years, the level of sadness and grief that came out, and very rough rides. as Allie well knows, but eventually it got better. And the reason I wanted to reach out to you again, Ellie, because you are a world of knowledge. I trust your not just your experience, but your knowledge as well. You do a lot of research, and it is science-based research. But I came across the telepathy tapes recently that deals with autism and the ability for non-speaking autism children and people to communicate with each other on a telepathic level. And because of my background in the energetic field, I understand their ability to do so, and I know that it's the real thing. But it also reminded me of your experience with your own son and the journey that you went through after he was diagnosed with autism. So I'd love for you to share that story with us, if you will.
Yeah, with pleasure. Just before I get into that, I just want to let you know that the science-based system actually has a map. And so just really quickly, there's 3 jurisdictions in Heilkunst. The first one being, diet, water intake, sleep, that kind of thing.
Yes.
The second jurisdiction really is the homeopathic medicine to peel the onion of the emotional and physical shocks and trauma in the order in which individuals have assumed them. This
Yes.
enables us to get about a 98% rate of something that is not typically spoken about in other systems of medicine. This
Mm.
jurisdiction really is the psychological or psychotherapeutic
Yeah.
essence of resolving the state of mind that actually conjured the disease matrix in the first place. And so I am not knowledgeable, like you say, to the degree that you may think I am. I'm actually really a seal. I am actually harping specifically on what I have studied over the last 30 years based on resonance, as you so beautifully spoke about, because my own son was damaged. He was born 2 months premature. And I very innocently, as a financial advisor with the Canadian federal government at the time, did never question or think twice about waltzing into the allopathic arena.
Mm.
Even the doctor himself said, well, we better delay this child's vaccines
Yeah.
because the concern is that he might have an ill reaction.
Yeah.
So instead of that 12 months for the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella shot, we delayed it based on the doctor's counsel to
Yes.
15 months. The problem was that after that, by 18 months, Jordan had lost all eye contact. He was no longer speaking anymore, and he was doing this weird rocking back and forth, and he also wasn't passing stool, maybe once every week or once every 2 weeks. And he was put under general anesthetic once of the 7 times I took him to the hospital because he was so backed up. They put him under general anesthetic and removed the impacted stool manually from his body. And I've written about this because I said if Jordan was ever wholly resolved from his ills, I
Mm.
will write a book and offer it up for free. That was my pledge to God because I was so freaked out and so terrified as his mother that I had caused this due to some lack of knowledge on my part. And that's
Yeah.
the thing, they didn't have labels back almost 30 years ago. There was no word like autism. I was
No.
told by the head of CHIO, he is from South America, and he said to me, well, some boys just seem to suffer symptoms like this. Put them on a high fiber diet and give them a lot of water. That should help.
Hey.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was just about it for me. And yeah, that's the thing. After having in my 25-year practice treated thousands of children in this so-called spectrum, I've
Right.
seen it all in this time. So
Mm.
children that are very Asperger's like as the allopathic label. I don't really put those labels on my patients. Those in the ASD spectrum, a lot of these kids are savants, so they seem to be getting downloads from other sources. The reason I think it's easier for them to be receptive to this is that often they're caught in a very early developmental stage when children have natural psychic abilities between birth and age 6 and 7, where they remember past lives, they're able to receive, knowledge that is not typical of an education system that, dumbs down our regular kids. They often, because they're caught in this early stage of development, often have capacities that are more indicative to gifted individuals that are super clairvoyant or psychic.
Yeah, yeah. So how were you able to walk us through the process of getting your son from having these difficulties to being fully functional?
Yeah. So I took him to every therapist you could ever imagine. And think about it, I'm a financial advisor. Everything, A plus B must equal C. And I was very linear in my thinking, and I wasn't going to be going to any woo-woo practitioner. Except that I kept getting recommendations from people to go to, spiritual individuals that didn't touch him at all and just held their hands over, and there were incantations, and they filled their mouth with rose water and spit it all over him, and there were
Oh, wow.
crystals placed. Oh yeah, I had a blast. This was so fascinating and interesting to me. And in classical homeopathy, he got better for a bit, and then all the unresolved issues just came back. Chiropractors, like I went everywhere. And
Um,
then there were 3 people in 1 week said, go and see Rudy Verspor and Patty Smith, his wife. And they seem to be doing this homeopathy thing differently. And I thought, oh, for the love of all that's holy, like, all right, yeah. Since 3 people recommended, I'll just throw more, hundreds of dollars at this thing that never seems to hold or resolve the root cause of my son's ills. And that's what I did. And within 3, 4 months, he started speaking. He started making eye contact. He gained 12 pounds and 2 shoe sizes within 12 months because he wasn't thriving. If you're that constipated and backed up, there's no food getting in. And so he barely ever ate. In fact, there were a couple of times where I thought I was going to lose him. He's had fevers one after the other and incredible, bouts of vomiting, and just like, every time he cut a tooth, it was just another shit show of, symptoms and hell on earth. I sat on the bathroom floor with him for hours and hours and hours reading books, hoping he would pass this mass, but only the bolus, which was the leaking stool, would come down. And so this was years. We're talking, I'm into, 5.5 years now with this child with this incredible problem since 15 months of age of getting that MMR shot. So it was a horror film. I remember my husband and I sitting crying on the back step in the garden in our backyard. And he said, is it your family matrix that caused this? That marriage actually didn't last. No surprise, but it doesn't. Marriages that have autistic babes generally, because the stress is off the freaking
yeah,
charts. And so, yeah, no blaming on either side of our equation. But
yeah,
yeah, it was certainly a combination of Jordan's genetic predisposition for diseases coming down both our family lines, because you marry the same
yeah,
genetic miasms, and then coupled that with the iatrogenesis. So that was the shock that we call pharma-induced, drugs that actually arrested his development, so spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, and caught him in the web of not being able to advance any further. What Heilkunst did, and as I observed it, was reversed the disease matrices by unclogging the system of his traumas, taking him back to factory settings at birth, which was a huge trauma for Jordan, born 32 weeks gestation, which is almost 8 weeks early, the
Yeah.
C-section and all of those drugs and the infection in my wound as I'm nursing him on 15 broad spectrum antibiotics. I mean, it's just a freaking recipe for disaster. So all of this iatrogenesis had to be reversed. And then when we treated those genetic miasms specifically for tuberculosis, and now I know this is hard to say, but we take the individual like an onion and peel the emotional and physical shocks and traumas back to birth. And
Yeah.
then we grab those genetic miasms, and on the law of cure like cures like, which is homeopathic law, we reverse each one of those genetic miasms. Now, the two big ones for my own son were tuberculinum and then syphilinum. And we had, God bless him, a 99% rate of cure with him. So I was so floored. I thought, this is not even possible. Like, what hell kind of voodoo is this? Were the exact thoughts that I had. So when I was between projects with the federal government, Patty and Rudy invited me to set up their international school because they were actually running the British Institute of Homeopathy across Canada. So I said, oh my God, I could do that in my sleep, but I'm happy to give back because you actually cured my son of his unresolved issues, and I'm freed from that karmic load of the terror that I had caused this in him. And
Mm.
so they convinced me to start to study because I got a really substantial discount in the tuition. Plus, I was doing so much better mentally, emotionally, and physically. My traumas included my father's death prematurely of a heart attack at the age of 43 and my mother's suicide at the age of 32 when I was 8. And
Yeah.
so I knew I was sitting on a landmine because I knew what my aunts and uncles had all suffered because of these genetic predisposition. So
Yeah.
again, that was part of the recipe of Jordan's disaster. And I knew it. I just until now didn't know how to solve it. I
Right.
never intended to practice, Gabby. That was not my goal at all. I thought, what could I ever just say to somebody that would be of any kind of value? I mean, as a financial advisor, I was taking, director generals of the Canadian government through, the financial year of commitments and budgets, and I managed an account of $13 million for it. That was my world, and so.
Yeah.
Advising people on their diets and their mental states and, peeling the onions of their shocks and traumas, not my gig. And so, yeah, I went through 4 years of study, and it was only in clinical where I saw 3 cases of fourth-stage cancer reversed. That I was like, wait, are you freaking kidding me? And then I received almost like a calling, which you'll understand was that,
Yeah.
yeah, my old world is dying and I can't go back in there in good conscience because
Hmm.
God is telling me this is my new way of being. And
Yeah.
I was so reluctant to pick up that phone. I did not, like, it was like the Matrix. I kept slamming it back down in the holster. I was like, no, 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 no,
I get it.
no.
But when you get the calling, you it's what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Unfreaking deniable. And there are still days, like I say, when we're working on the recent iatrogenic insults that people have received over the last 5 years, where we're dealing with having to reverse issues that just are so far reaching: myocarditis, cancer, the iatrogenic shock, where we're finding like metal bodies in people's physiology now that they're hooked to a 5G grid that we never anticipated, all of this kind of shite in our midst.
Yeah.
It's a whole different, I'm getting ready to retire at this stage in my life, getting into my middle 60s now. I'm like, Are you kidding me? I'm never going to be able to retire at this rate. I thought things were going to just kind of slowly cycle down for me, but oh my God. So we've had to hire a whole lot of other Heilkunst physicians. And I was also doing the animal portion and the vet portion as well. So I've had to, bring in a Heilkunst specialist that actually specializes in animal care because it was just way too much. Like I was starting to twitch.
Yeah, yeah. And okay, so from Heilkun's perspective, um, what would be the recommendation for somebody that has doubts, just like you did, in possibly adding this as a complement, because that's what we did with my treatment as well. And I really appreciate that about you, because you didn't say stop doing blah, blah, blah. You said, on the contrary, this will make it more effective. And so from if because I put myself in the shoes of a parent that has an autistic child. My one of my siblings, one of my brothers is autistic. And if my mom had had that information way back when, mind you, he wasn't diagnosed autistic until he was an adult because there were other complications as well with him. He also has mental health, complicated mental health issues. So, but I put myself in the shoes of my mom, or just as someone, if I had a child with any condition whatsoever that I was told is not curable or not reversible or not treatable, I would not stop. I would go to the ends of the world and every other universe in the Milky Way and, existence to find an answer. Because I know intuitively that the body can heal itself. And from my own personal experience, I know that this works. I like to recommend things that I've either tried or I've actually seen in one way or another actually working. And I know that this works. What would you say to somebody that is looking for answers but is very, very skeptical, just like you were?
Yeah, fair enough. What we have here, and I'm going to bring this map back up, is when we take a person like an onion and peel the emotional and physical shocks and traumas and then actually eliminate the chronic diseases alongside with dropper bottles that support anything that's going on in the present. So as you mentioned earlier, kids have lots of heavy metals and such in their bodies, often from mercury fillings of the parents or prior vaccines that those parents took in. It's interesting because my mother had issues before she committed suicide. Her lithium, her drug, showed up in my core bioresonance feedback system, which my husband does. So we're all related, and our kids are subject to what's come before them. So what's happening is most people are in the mystical realm, or they're in the mechanistic, mechanical realm. Okay.
Right.
So there are skeptics at either pole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Oh, let's just try more Reiki. Let's apply more crystals. Like, as I said about Jordan, hands-off treatment, spiritual treatments, yes, has a role. And you don't stop those, but they're generally not on the basis or the law of nature like Cures Light. The mechanists are the same. I've had allopathic doctors say, how did the 8 mm hole close in that babe's heart? And when the father said, well, we went to this woman who applies Heilkunst principles, and he said, I want to talk to her because I've never seen this before, right? That Rockefeller Rothschild education that puts people more in the masculine or mechanistic pole are also super skeptical, right? This is more the feminine pole. But we're at a juncture in our evolution where we actually need a speedboat that goes down the center between those two poles.
Right.
We need knowledge based on the feminine and based on masculine principles, because we're at a time when, Osiris's bones have been found. We're putting him back together, right?
Yeah.
We're not lost anymore in mysticism or in mechanism. That's the epoch we are now in. So we got to get on board super quick, because what's happening is we're standing here with frayed robes. I've got lawyers who are in their gowns running from, being in the court and defending a client to running to her Bikram yoga class across the street.
Yeah.
This is a true story. And we're all trying to figure out the mystical and mechanical ways of jamming the patient into one kind of thought. And just think yourself better. Well, I challenge you that if you have the pregnancy of a disease matrix, like the cancer state of mind, you can keep thinking yourself better. However, if that's an engendered pregnancy of a disease, you can't unthink yourself pregnant.
Interesting.
Right? You need lawful prescribing. So the body will only cure itself when you remove the shocks and traumas and genetic predisposition for the roots of those disease matrices. Then, yes, consciousness then becomes the illuminating capacity in the third jurisdiction of Heilkunst to be able to think yourself into any manifestational pattern you like. But if you have all this noise still here and you're an O blood type eating like a vegetarian, you're screwed, frankly.
Right. It's interesting that you brought up the materialism versus the esoteric, because even in the telepathy tapes, they talk about this, that materialistic science that's based on materialism, is so outdated and needs to incorporate the energetic type of science in order to understand autism and the ability for non-speaking autistic people to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
So the fact that you mentioned it even from a Heilkunst perspective makes absolute sense. And I understand, and correct me, I'm not sure if I remember well, but I remember you saying that we first need to deal with the physical body, then the emotional, mental, and lastly, the energetic, or how does that work?
Yeah. So going back to this map, when we
Mhm.
start peeling the onion, we see resolution in the root cause of people's suffering. With autistic babes, we generally then open up Pandora's box. And this is what most therapists, either mystical or mechanical, have no freaking clue what's happened. So when the child, a case in point of a child I served years ago, started cutting off the heads of all his teddy bears and hanging them down the steps of his parents' home. And so the fears and the terrors that normally don't show up in a child that's unfolded naturally in a union of an incredible amount of love without all the iatrogenic insults won't show up with these fears and terrors. It's terrifying for a 22-year-old, to start showing some of these fears. Parents are afraid they're going to get hit. In many cases, they can show up with a lot of violence. There is no other system of medicine that I know about that knows how to deal with these chthonic terrors. It also, I don't know any other system of medicine that understands the stages of belief in with regards to one's spiritual knowledge. what's interesting is that these beliefs are actually treated with drugs like ayahuasca, like agaricus, which are magic mushrooms, but in a homeopathic form above Avogadro's law, where there's no chemical substance left, we can send it in higher potencies to resolve the root cause of those beliefs instead of just trying to think yourself better.
Okay. Interesting. And that brings me to another question I have that is a little bit away from autism. This was a beautiful segue. How does Heilkunst treat complicated mental health conditions? And
Yeah.
what have you observed from your own experience treating clients over the years?
Yeah. Well, I would suggest then reading our clients' words on our testimonials page on arcanum.ca because it's all there.
Yeah,
But in essence, if you look at my map again,
yeah,
this is the mystical pole. This is the mechanical pole of fear and terror,
yeah.
right? This is the realm of beliefs. And these two poles are schizophrenically split. We're all schizophrenic and in the autistic spectrum to a level of degree, all of us. So every single case is complicated
Great.
because, yeah, we have been educated by a system that doesn't understand true learning or education, doesn't have a clue, never asked you, for the first 20 years of your life, were you ever asked, what are you meant to be?
Oh God, no.
Yeah,
No, I was just instructed what I was supposed to learn. No one
exactly.
ever, no one even asked, what is your opinion on what I'm teaching you?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
One of my books that I wrote, I've written 26 of them. One of them was really about volitional learning. So it's about, what is it that you would like to know? And my kids were homeschooled,
nice.
after a number of years in Waldorf. And so that because I realized that so many of the children I was serving were suffering suicidal inclinations because they're just jammed information. Here, learn this, and then I'm going to test you. How to negate a child's inner value and essence.
Yeah.
The whole damn thing needs to be flipped on its ass. And we need to ask
Mhm.
children, what is that you've come downloaded with? And what do
What
you
would you
want to
like to
tell
learn?
me? Yeah. What do you want
Yeah,
to play
yeah,
at today? You tell me. And I'll supply you with the tools and the resources to honor your essential self
hmm. That's
because we're
beautiful.
going to tease out what God divined into you as your specific gifts. And if you happen to be communicating with other individuals around the world, let's also honor that so that you don't have to be afraid anymore that
Hmm.
you got born into the wrong place and time.
Right. You touched on a little bit about um, genetic, you call them, you refer to them as genetic miasms, but genetic predispositions to things. And I'd like to touch a little bit more on that because I know that many clients always wonder, and I hear it all the time. Well, I have the gene for blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. And I just tell them just because you have a gene in that was passed on, it does not mean that it's going to express itself. The emotion usually triggers the expression of that.
Yeah.
But from the Heilkunst perspective, how do you deal with the genetic miasms?
Yeah. I love that you asked me that in order. So
Hmm.
first of all, in order, these are a representation of time. This is from biblical times, Sora, leprosy. You couldn't be a high priestess at the time,
Yes.
right? Or high priest. If you were covered in scabies, you were ostracized and put in a cave so that you couldn't cause harm to healthy humans, right? Exactly. Malaria, tuberculosis, tuberculinum. You were sent up to a sanatorium 400 or 500 years ago in England, France, or Scotland, or Ireland, or wherever you came from, because tuberculosis, people feel better in a sanatorium up in a pine forest. That's interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
So once you know, and we just keep unpacking it, Mediterranean, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, heart disease, 1920s, when we burned our bras. Yeah, not doing the booby, yeah, encasement thing anymore. Yeah, and so that is heart disease, stroke, UTIs, prostate issues, lots of issues with like ganglions, warts, and then cancer carcinosin can show up in any organ. The
Hmm.
state of mind for cancer is a disease of resignation, the unlived life, rescuing others to the exclusion of self. So I've had women say to me, well, my husband really wants me to get chemotherapy. And so
Hmm.
I'm going to do what he says. And the doctor's so nice. He's just so nice, Allie. Like, and he's going to, poison me very nicely. And I'm going along with it. I've had women say to me, it's my second bout of breast cancer. I'm not doing that again because the surgery and the chemotherapy radiation clearly doesn't work for me.
Right.
So when she went back to the doctor outside Ottawa and said, I want the diagnostic tools like MRIs and X-rays and stuff like that, because I want to prove if this woman in Bell's Corners is going to actually cure the underlying cause. And the doctor said, no, you can't have my tools to analyze what you're going through with another physician. And she said, fuck you. I'm going to Kingston then. I was like, all right, we got a cure here. I'm not going to have to do much except just remove the blockages. And
Right.
the blockages to cure were exactly on the law of cure, like cures like, resolving the trauma during the course of her life, including the prior surgery, the chemo warfare. Where do we ever use the term the war on cancer, like the war on heart disease? It's always the war on cancer. And the reason for that comes actually really brilliantly from John Robbins' book, Reclaiming Your Health. He was the Robbins from Baskin and Robbins and said to
Yes.
his daddy, I don't want any of your ice cream money. I got to figure out this health thing because that's not it. And
Yeah.
so he actually wrote that it's less than 3% efficacy for chemotherapy radiation. And that
Yes.
came because there was an explosion of the US Harvey ship out just in the port of Italy at the tail end of Second World War. And the sailors that survived, the mustard gas that was in the hold of that ship,
Hmm.
they deemed was chemo radiation. And then the head of the military warfare became the head of the Sloan Kettering Institute, which is the chief. I mean, if you trace it back, sister, it's
Yeah.
so obvious what happened.
Right.
So the law of cure remains still like cures like, and again, that mystic and mechanical pole have no clue that that's the truth to resolve the underlying cause. Then you get into syphilis and Lyme. Syphilis is when the buildings were bombed. Um, and I use the word bombed in New York City. We didn't know who the enemy was. It's the beginning of where we are right now. And so you can see evolution is speeding up. This was thousands of years, skin issues in the Bible, thousands of years. And
Right.
then, 1920s, carcinosin or cancer, very much the disease of the 60s, 70s, 80s. Now we're in the 2000s. Lyme, I was trying to figure out, you can see it's written in hand on my map. I couldn't
Yeah.
figure out how everybody was going to buy a cabin and live in the woods because it's all about the modern day hermit and isolation. So when they told us to shelter in place in our homes, I was like, oh my God, there it is.
Wow.
Welcome, Lyme. Here we are. So, women tell me constantly, oh, Allie, I was diagnosed with Lyme. I'm Lyme diagnosed. I have a diagnosis of Lyme. Yes, you do. I
Hmm.
know you were never bit by a tick, but we are now in that particular epoch. So everybody in isolation, even the fact that we're talking in isolation in
Yeah.
two different countries right now. We
Yeah.
research in isolation. I work in isolation with my patients
Yes.
online, then I hang up and go to the next person.
Right.
You're doing online work as well too. So it's all about being isolated.
Interesting. Something you mentioned before with regards to one of the genetic miasms, which is the carcino,
Yeah,
I
carcinosin for
guess
cancer.
that's uh, it automatically reminded me of the book When the Body Says No by
Mhm.
Dr. Gabor Mate. And he has been quoted many, many times saying it's not the bitches that get sick, it's the nice girls.
Yeah,
So
well said.
stop being so fucking nice.
Yeah, well said. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the whole province where I come from, my family's been in New Brunswick since 1789. I come from the tribe of nice girls.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very nice girls. Everybody behaves and does what they're told. They love the nanny state, the government. They complain about it, but they never really do anything about it. I fought against the government of New Brunswick, 7 years ago, to
Mm.
keep vaccination out of schools as a mandatory dictate by the
Minister.
education minister.
Okay.
And oh, I fought tooth and nail. We only won by 2 votes in Fredericton,
Okay.
which was horrifying to me. And my husband said, "We got to get you out of here, Ally. You're too vocal. You're too much a mouthpiece. It's not safe for you to be in Canada anymore because eventually you're going to say something that's really going to piss somebody off, and we better get you to Mexico." So I get to live in the beautiful country you were born in, for
Yes.
which I feel very blessed because I can be me and say, yeah, exactly what I need and want to say, and practice serving, Canadians, mostly Americans actually,
Mm.
and Mexicans as well. Local Mexicans, I actually volunteer and serve them at no cost because I love my community and have been treated with so much love and grace here. So,
Yes.
yeah, all that to say is that, yeah, we have beautiful individuals who actually ship
Mm.
homeopathics to our patients worldwide. We do more broadcasts to individuals in Europe
Mhm.
and Australia because it would take forever to ship the remedies from Mexico, the US, and Canada.
Right. And by broadcast, just so that everyone understands, is
Yeah.
the remedy is sent energetically and it is incredibly effective.
Yeah, it is as effective as shipping because in essence, we're removing the loop bag. And in the intellect or mechanical or even the mystical state of mind really needs to have something in the physical. And we're in your realm now, Gabby. We've, stepped up in the last 17 years to realize that patients in the far reaches of this earth don't often have the luxury. So the first time I remember was a little boy in South Africa who had a very high fever. There was a scourge going through with regards to a flu, and people were really down and really sick. This was way before COVID, like 17 years ago. And we
Mhm.
broadcasted the first influenzinum homeopathic remedy. He was the only individual in all of his family that
Yeah.
actually improved within 6 hours to
Right.
be completely fine. So then, yeah, my financial advisor's brain was blowing yet again. And so now, I highlighted when I prepared for my cases this week, I highlight them pink when they're broadcasts.
Okay.
Because that's the color of wisdom as far as I'm concerned. And we're at a
Yes.
juncture now where 90% of my patients, no matter where they are in the world, are receiving remedies really through consciousness and through the bioresonance feedback system we use.
Fantastic. And I've actually just finished listening to an audiobook by Greg Braden where he talked about an experiment that has been done, and it's been done by him and many other people as well, where wherever they focus their attention on a meditation, that place that they intended to receive the energy from the meditation experiences incredibly or almost no violence, no fighting. There's everything, like there's no people don't get arrested, there's no fights, there's no, and it just goes down to, if not zero, such low levels.
Yep.
And they've proven that it only takes a little bit of energy, intention, to create those environments.
Yeah.
So
Well said. That was a meditation of 4,000 people quite a number of years ago. And
yeah,
it proved that it was the most harmonious and synergistic time in all of human consciousness. Like you say, no wars, no dissension, no conflict whatsoever. And as you say, this is the time that we're actually now consciously as women, we're weaving that knowledge, because it's no joke that wisdom comes from the mystical feminine pole, right?
yes,
And it's
yes,
time for Sophia to incarnate into the physical, into the arms of her beloved Christ consciousness. I'm not talking
yes,
about a person. I'm
no,
talking about the vessel of the
yes,
male to receive her. Why did we used to carry women across the threshold of a home after marriage? Well, because we were purveying the wisdom of Sophia into that
interesting,
home, right? So we
interesting.
carried her, the masculine carried the feminine. And that gesture now is being spread across all of humanity and the cosmos.
Right. And I love that you brought that up. And there's never a coincidence when we have a conversation, Ali, because I've always, since the early 1990s, I've looked into matriarchal societies in the world, because my grandmother on my father's side was from Juchitán, Oaxaca, which is one of the few matriarchal societies in the world. And the commonalities among matriarchal societies is that there is no rape, no abuse of women. Businesses are run incredibly effectively. All conflict is resolved for the best of everyone involved. They're basically harmonious societies because the feminine energy is the one that is more dominant. Men stay home and look after the homes, the properties, etc. They still serve a purpose, but when the women run those societies, they're run harmoniously and effectively. And it's interesting because I just did a video on the weekend that I had done before, but I wanted to redo it again because it keeps coming up, explaining to people what source energy is and how that source energy is inside of everything. And this, I represented the sleeve with my hand, my opposite hand, and then I used a scarf to make like a, introduce it into the sleeve, but we're never separate from the rest of the scarf, which is source energy. And I don't know why, but it came out of my mouth. And I said, this is source or the mother. And that was completely not me. It source wanted me to say that it is source or the mother.
Mhm.
So true Christ consciousness is a feminine energy.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
I just walked the Camino de Santiago across all of northern Spain back
Yeah.
in, and to that point, I looked for the three Marys, Anna, grandmother of Jesus, Mary
Mhm.
Magdalene, Mary the mother.
Yeah.
And there really is no Jesus predominating in any of it. And the further you get from France, where they lived in Glastonbury, in the hills and mountains in southern Spain, where they actually brought Mary, who was carrying, the Christ's
Yes.
offspring, and Anna, grandmother of Jesus. These are beautiful books that I absolutely love. it was interesting because it was in all the churches and all the art and the leche madre who had her breast exposed through all the churches as she's feeding the baby. With magnificent depictions of what humanity has missed with the descent of what's happened in Catholic religions and all religions, because they've all gone rogue somewhere along the way. I was looking for exactly what you have illuminated to. The further I got away from France, the closer to Santiago, the Compostela, it became more masculinized. Right,
Interesting.
there were 12 priests on the podium, where they swing the Bonafon, I forget the name of the incense that swings on the huge, yeah,
Okay.
so that was interesting to me that I could actually witness and see this descent, whereas the feminine was truly the essence of all human religions in the beginning. I mean, Isis trained Mary Magdalene in the arts of tantric sex. Christ himself went into India for years and was learning how to shapeshift and show up in other places around the world, not in the physical form. Right.
Yes.
And we're bringing all this commingling of the masculine and the feminine in its true wisdom in this mechanical realm that we're in, mystically intact, which again is why I really feel that Heilkunst is the medicine based on principle, respecting those two poles.
Right. Right. And if I think even further on this, that anything that is creative, a woman's womb creates life.
Yeah.
The creator is a feminine energy.
Yeah. The sword of truth is put in the loins of the man because his job is to defend that wisdom that the woman has brought into the home. That's how you have this beautiful co-joint harmony, is when we truly understand our value and our roles, which is coming more and more to the fore now.
Yes. And interesting that you mentioned that too, because it seems like we're going through really difficult times. There's a lot of unrest, even the Schumann resonance, and I'm getting chills in my legs as I say this, so it has to be said. The Schumann resonance keeps doing funky things. There's in the light worker community, there's talk of a lot of things, and going into future years. But what I always say to clients, even within a personal level, we need to destruct the past to recreate the present and future, and recreate, really co-create, but create it. And so the uncomfortable feelings, the destruction that's happening is part of the process of where we're going, as uncomfortable as it feels.
Yeah, well said. And the beings in the sun, that wisdom is intelligent enough that it
Yes.
knows we need a hell of a dose of
Mhm.
potency. Because, yeah, cosmically and earthwise, the dose mechanically and mystically needs to be strong enough to
Yes.
actually shake up the patriarchal descent that the Kali Yuga has spoken about for thousands and thousands of years. And here we are, my love. We are March 24th, the ending of some cycles that have lasted 80,000 years, sister, this week. Like, oh my God. So, yeah, the reason that we're getting so many impulses from so many sources calls for our health
Yeah.
and discernment in the holistic way that we have never embodied it before.
Beautiful. That's that is a wonderful way, I think, to end the discussion and leave people with a lot of food for thought. Hopefully. And my goal is never ever to convince anyone of anything because we all have our paths, and I know you have the same belief system that if it resonates, great. But if I can give you a different perspective to research, then that it's enough. And if it doesn't make any sense, then ignore it. Don't watch,
Yeah.
whatever. But I'm of the belief that there's an answer for everything. We
Yeah.
just have to keep looking until we find that answer.
Well said. And that's the thing, in both of our cases, these are not always our clients,
Right.
and neither are these.
Yes.
The only individuals that will create a resonance pattern with either one of us are on that speedboat of that particular evolutionary path between the schizophrenic split of those extremes. The ones that intuitively know, oh, the masculine and feminine divide is now coming to its full fruition in a holistic way that it never has before. It's time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be a vehicle or carrier for that essential truth.
Right. Beautiful. Ellie, thank you so much.
Such my
I
pleasure.
love
I love
every
hanging out with you.
conversation. And me too. Every conversation we have, it just goes deep. And I love it. Um, thank you. Thank you so much. I know you're super,
That's my
super busy.
pleasure.
If anybody wants to contact you, how can they contact you?
Yeah, best way, www.arcanum, ARCAN as in Nancy, UM as in Madre, .ca. And so, yeah. And you can also reach out to me personally at A McQuinn, McQuinn, at arcanum.ca. I'm happy to answer any of your questions or further this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Mwah.
Muchísimas gracias, mi amor, mi amiga
Oh,
preciosa.
your Spanish is so good. Yay.
I'm working hard, sister. It's not easy.